Welcome back, everyone. We are excited today to have a conversation with and hear remarks from Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack. As many folks know, he serves as the nation's 32nd secretary. As the newly sworn-in leader of USDA, Secretary Vilsack is working hard to strengthen the agricultural economy, build vibrant rural communities, and ensure a safe and abundant food supply for all Americans. Secretary Vilsack previously served in this role for 8 years under President Obama. During his first tenure, Vilsack fought to put Americans back to work and to create a strong and sustainable economy. Between his two stints as Ag Secretary, Secretary Vilsack served as President and CEO of the U.S. Dairy Export Council. Prior to his appointment in 2009, Vilsack served 2 terms as the governor of Iowa in the state Iowa State Senate and as mayor of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. A native of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Vilsack was born into an orphanage and adopted in 1951. The Vilsacks have 2 adult sons, 2 daughters-in-law, and 4 grandchildren. Secretary Vilsack, it is my honor to welcome you to the NFU convention. Mr. Secretary, I believe you are on mute.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Really appreciate, Rob, the opportunity to be with all of you today, and appreciate the leadership of the National Farmers Union as we strive to improve opportunities for America's farmers, ranchers, and producers. I know that we've all gone through a very challenging time with COVID, and I sincerely hope that everyone who is participating in the meeting today, as well as their families, are well and healthy. I know that we all are anxious to get on the other side of the COVID situation so that we can return to whatever the new normal will be. But the reality is that farmers, ranchers, and producers around this country have had difficulties for a lot longer than we've been dealing with the COVID situation. Recently, I had the opportunity to review some information from the Department of Agriculture concerning farm income. And it was amazing to me that 89.6% of America's farmers, ranchers, and producers do not make a majority of their money from their farming operations. I can't think of a more significant statistic than that to suggest and to urge all of us to work on transforming our food system in the country so that more farmers, more producers, more ranchers have a better chance of getting a majority of their income from their farming and ranching and producing operations. That's why the focus of the Biden USDA is going to be on new, more, better, and fairer markets. Let me give you examples of each of those categories. And then I'll be glad to talk a little bit about COVID and COVID relief, and then respond to any questions that you all may have. Let me start with new market opportunities. If we're going to turn things around, it's going to be necessary for us in agriculture to work creatively and innovatively to create new market opportunities, new sources of income, new revenue streams for farmers, so that they are not just solely dependent on the sale of commodities. I think climate offers a tremendous opportunity for us to create at least 2 new revenue streams, perhaps 3. Let me visit with you about those 3. First, there's the opportunity to sequester carbon. We all know that if we're going to be serious about emissions, if we're going to be serious about controlling climate, if we're going to be serious about adapting and mitigating to a changing climate, it is going to be necessary for us to reduce emissions across the board. And I think agriculture is poised to be a leader in this effort. You're not going to be able to sequester carbon unless you engage rural America on farms and ranches. And to do that, we need to create financial incentives and markets that are not designed and structured for an investment class, but are designed and constructed and implemented for farmers. So that's why we will begin a process of outreach to farmers pursuant to an executive order that President Biden has signed, in which we'll be asking for your input on how we might best be able to create new market opportunities as we sequester carbon. We want to establish a system that's designed by farmers for farmers. And that's one opportunity, I think, that we have at USDA to provide assistance and help in developing a roadmap for the creation of a viable carbon market that produces more income for farmers. Secondly, I think it's an opportunity as well for us to invest in new technologies that can convert agricultural waste into a variety of products, chemicals, materials, fabrics, and fibers. The dairy industry is working very hard on a series of initiatives to convert manure into a variety of different products. This too creates a new opportunity, a new revenue stream. The potential for dairy operations, for example, to reclaim the water from the manure for their operations, to extract from it organic materials that can be used in organic farming, and then pelletize essentially the remaining solids into a nutrient that can be stored and packaged and transported around the world. Tremendous new opportunity. And finally, there's the opportunity to continue to collect and to reuse methane from livestock operations that will allow us to add to the renewable fuel and energy mix of this country. So USDA needs to be engaged and involved in providing the resources to make those new markets possible, so that as we develop and construct new farm bills in the future, we provide the opportunities for continued expansion. At the same time we're doing this in new markets, we obviously have to use traditional programs that already exist: EQIP, CSP, CRP, REAP, RCPP, in ways that will allow us to expand significantly and to invest in and to incent climate smart agricultural practices and regenerative practices. We've got to be serious about soil health. We lose about 4.5 tons per acre of our precious soil each and every year. We only are able naturally to reclaim about 0.5 ton per acre. So there is a real need for us to focus on soil health. And we need to make sure that the programs that we have available at USDA are utilized for that purpose. All of that can create, I think, support and new revenue sources for farmers. In the area of more markets, well, first and foremost, we're talking about assuring that any trade agreements we have are enforced consistent with the letter and spirit of the trade agreement. I'm thinking specifically about the USMCA and specifically about our friends in Canada. Whether it's wheat or whether it's dairy or whether it's any other commodity, we want to make sure that the agreement that opens up new market opportunities, that expands market opportunities, is actually implemented in the way it was intended. So today and this week, I will have conversations with the Secretaries of Agriculture in Mexico and the Minister of Agriculture in Canada to reinforce our goal and our belief that these agreements need to be enforced to the letter. It also means expanding more local and regional food systems, the opportunity for more farm to school programs, more food hubs, more farmers markets, more ways in which we can engage opportunities where producers don't necessarily have to compete all the time in a commodity-based market where prices are set by someone else, but creating new markets where farmers are in control of setting those prices. It also means expanding processing opportunities. The reality is we found through COVID the difficulties in maintaining the resilience of our system if one or two of our packing facilities shut down. There's no reason why the Department of Agriculture can't work with the investment community and farmers, ranchers, and co-ops to create more processing facilities for smaller operations to provide farmers more opportunities to market their livestock. I think if we had expanded processing capacity, we'd have more competition and we'd also have greater resilience. And finally, more markets means making sure that we have a renewable fuel standard that is enforced and recognized and respected by the administration. I'm pleased to see EPA's recent announcement relative to waivers. We're not going to see the kind of liberal use of waivers that were granted in the previous administration. And hopefully we will work closely with EPA to make sure that the RFS is enforced and implemented appropriately. Better markets means strengthening the rules that do exist for open and transparent and fair markets. It means more price discovery. It means stronger enforcement of existing rules and regulations and strengthening those rules and regulations. It means interagency collaboration with the Department of Justice and others to make sure that the marketplaces that are available to farmers are operating in a fair and reasonable way. And it means using the purchasing power of the federal government through procurement to ensure that we have fair, open markets. And speaking of fairness, it's going to be a priority of USDA to make sure that we're treating all of our producers, especially socially disadvantaged producers, fairly. We'll establish an equity commission. We are announcing today the appointment of Dwayne Goldman, who will serve as a senior advisor on equity. He joins Andy Green, who will also join as a senior advisor on open markets, to specifically advise me and the deputy on steps that we need to take to make sure that we have better markets and fairer markets. We'll have an equity commission, which will begin the process of investigating all of the programs at USDA to make sure that we identify and root out any systemic racism that may exist in those programs. Now, the reality is that we've not only had discrimination in the past, but we've had the cumulative effect of that discrimination, which needs to be addressed. And that's why it's important that Congress and the Senate now pass the American Rescue Plan that contains resources that will allow us to address and begin to address some of the cumulative impacts and effects of discrimination that has taken place over the course of years at the Department of Agriculture. We all know that we're engaged in trying to get on the other side of COVID. And over the course of the last year, Congress has passed on several occasions COVID relief packages. Two of those packages, for the most part, the resources have been invested. There are several $billion left that will need to be invested over the next several months, which we will continue to do. Recently, in December, Congress passed a third package. And the question has been asked of me, when will we expect and see the distribution of those resources? Well, before we can distribute those resources, we need to do an evaluation of exactly how the previous resources have been appropriated and divided and paid out. What I've been told is that for the resources that have already been expended, roughly the top 10% of producers in the country received 60% of those benefits. The bottom 10% received 0.26% of those benefits. Obviously, several parts and several areas of the country and several commodities received a significant amount of support, and certainly support was necessary. But we want to make sure that when we utilize this third tranche of resource, that we are able to do it in a way that provides overall equity and fairness in the distribution of these support payments. I think it's important for us to do an evaluation, figure out who was left out, who was not supported to the extent that they needed to be supported. We know that the legislation made reference to several key areas that have been left out in the past. We know that the American Rescue Plan is also providing additional resources in that respect. And so we want to make sure that when these resources are distributed, they're done in a fair and reasonable way. So we're going to take some time to do the study, to do the research, to figure out who was left out, to figure out what rules have to be enacted, to figure out the process. And when we announce, we'll give people additional time to sign up. There was a sign up deadline in February. We've extended that. It is currently, applications can still be received at USDA, and we will provide at least 30 days after we announce what the structure of the distribution plan is going to be, give people another 30 days in which to apply for those resources. And again, the goal is to try to make sure that when all is said and done, all the resources that have been provided, that everyone in the supply chain gets a fair shot at the resources. This is going to be a very active and proactive USDA. We're going to work closely with all of you to make sure that as we develop these new markets, as we develop more markets, as we develop better markets and fairer markets, that we're engaging the farm community in that conversation so you all know what we're doing and why we're doing it. I know there are a multitude of questions that you all have. I hope I'll be able to answer some of them. I've only been on the job for a couple of days, and the reality is, even though I had this job for 8 years, a few years back, things have changed. It's a different department. It's a different time. And frankly, I'm a different person. And so as a result, it's going to take me a little while to get up to speed, but hopefully this gives you a sense of the direction of the department over the course of the next months and years. And be glad to answer questions at this point, Rob.
All righty, thank you, Mr. Secretary. I might start with just a kind of a general question first. You know, we have a couple questions coming in, and we'll try to distill those as best we can. And Patty will also assist me in asking questions. But from the kind of larger administration perspective, can you speak a little bit about President Biden's priorities, though some of which you've mentioned, but others that we know that this administration is seeking to do kind of on a government wide. When we speak about climate, for example, that's very much a kind of administration wide approach that's being taken. Can you speak to how you see your voice, not only at USDA, but within the cabinet with other officials as well as the president, and how you plan to achieve those goals?
It's a great question. The president has established a national climate task force and has designated appointees to that task force. Obviously, I and the USDA are part of that task force. John Kerry, Gina McCarthy are working through the White House to sort of head up this effort. I will tell you that I intend to be very aggressive in this space because I honestly believe that agriculture is primed to be primed to create a series of early wins, if you will, on the climate agenda. It's going to take a while for the utility industry to essentially begin the process of aggressively addressing climate. It's going to take a while for the manufacturing industry to do what it needs to do to reduce emissions. It's going to take a long while for the construction industry to change and to modify the way it does business to reduce emissions. But we're primed here in agriculture to take steps immediately. If we provide resources and incentives and markets, I have no doubt that farmers will embrace the notion, if they feel that they're getting a fair shake in a carbon market. I mean, if the carbon market's designed for investors, that's not going to work. But if it's designed for farmers, to really encourage farmers to do the right thing, to do what they want to do to improve their soil health, I think we'll see a lot of farmers participate. If we use our existing programs smartly and wisely, I think we'll provide additional resources for farmers to do what they want to do in terms of climate. So I think we'll see some early wins. The president has challenged all of us to look at a future for American agriculture where we basically are a net zero emitter by the year 2050. And I will say that there is a market imperative for us to do this, whether it's domestically with consumers wanting to know more sustainable practices in the food that they consume, or whether it's internationally and our ability to successfully export agricultural products. We're going to have to prove to ourselves and to the world that we are a leader in this area of sustainability, environmentally, economically, and socially. And to do that, you need incentives, you need markets. So I think we're poised, we're in the best position to start early and quickly. I think we have some flexibility with the Commodity Credit Corporation to be able to do this and still be able to meet our responsibilities under Farm Bill programs and CRP. I think there are ways in which we can design this program so that farmers are the primary beneficiaries of it. So that's our goal. And I think if we can prove and if we can establish in those meetings with all of the other agencies the significant role that USDA is playing, agriculture is playing, advancing the agenda, I think we're going to get a lot of attention from the president, the vice president, and from other cabinet officials. We're going to work closely with them. We obviously have a close relationship with the EPA. And the reality is I've had a good conversation with the designee, Michael Reagan. I think he understands and appreciates the necessity of having constant communication between the two departments, of understanding the power of markets and incentives to get people to do what they need to do and what they want to do. And I'm hopeful that that's a very positive relationship. And again, I appreciate the fact the EPA has already taken some steps to reassure us on the RFS. So I'm convinced we're headed in the right direction. I'm convinced the president understands the importance of agriculture, and I intend to be very, very active in this space.
Thank you. At this point, I'll turn to Vice President Edelberg.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us today and remarks on everything you've talked about so far. Talking about markets, during your confirmation hearing, you noted the lack of openness, fairness, and competitiveness in our markets. You suggested that we can strengthen existing rules and laws to promote openness and fairness. Farmers Union wholeheartedly shares these views. What steps will USDA take to address the serious concentration problems in agricultural markets and supply chains?
Well, the first step is hiring Andy Green, who comes from the Center of American Progress. He has a long history of writing and studying and thinking about this space, and he's going to provide some very important and I think targeted advice. I think there are a number of things we can do and should do. First and foremost, take a look at what current authorities are and whether those authorities are being aggressively utilized as they were intended to be in order to create better and fairer markets. Secondly, are there ways in which we can create more price discovery so that there is more openness and transparency in terms of pricing? Third, are there ways in which we can suggest and propose shoring up, strengthening rules? We started that process in the Obama administration. We didn't necessarily have a Congress that was particularly supportive of this. I think we have a Congress now that will allow us the opportunity and the flexibility to strengthen those rules. And we need to be aggressive in that space. I think we need to work with the Department of Justice and see whether or not it makes sense to reestablish the task force that was established years ago and see whether or not we might be able to extend the membership of that task force to include other federal agencies that could have a stake and interest, whether it's the Federal Trade Commission or whether it's Small Business Administration or who it might be, that might be of assistance and help in being able to identify places where cases can be made, arguments can be made that are legitimate and properly supported. All of that, I think, is designed to create a strong message. I think there's procurement. The federal government buys a lot of stuff, and the question is, are we buying it from folks who operate fair and open markets? Are there ways in which we can not only have stronger enforcement, but are there ways in which we can pat those who do have open markets on the back and basically elevate them and make sure that people are aware that this is a place that where you do get a fair shake? I think there are a multitude of things we need to do, and hopefully Andy will work with us to create a very aggressive effort in this space.
I appreciate that. And we appreciate all the questions coming in. I can say with certainty we're not going to be able to address all of them, but we'll certainly try to distill as many as we can here. But building on one of the threads, there is references back to some of your opening comments about the access to programs and review, so that even if we aren't looking at inherent or direct systemic racism, for example, that we're making sure that the programs that are available, the resources that are available to growers out there of all kinds, that they know about these programs, that we're connecting them to the people that need them. And what, if anything, can you share at this point about what that review process in action might look like?
Rob, let me just say, obviously I've just been on the job for a couple of days, so I haven't had a chance to and many of the political appointments that are necessary for this department to operate at full strength obviously have not been made. I'd say a couple of comments. First of all, I do think that it's important for us to make sure that the workforce at USDA is as diverse and inclusive. If we're going to do a review, if we're going to come up with a set of recommendations, we're going to have a workforce that understands and appreciates the importance of implementing those. Secondly, I think you can't do everything all at once. I think you have to break this down. You mentioned assistance, technical assistance. That is a function of staffing, having adequate numbers of people working at the department. The previous administration didn't fill a lot of positions, so we're faced with many vacancies at virtually every level. Certainly on the science side with the National Institute of Food and Agriculture and the Environmental Research Service, significant numbers of vacancies there that need to be addressed in order for us to make sure that we have the capacity to provide the technical assistance that's necessary. Third, I think we need to create a much better, closer relationship with a number of community building organizations, NFU being one of them, but other organizations, particularly those that work specifically with socially disadvantaged producers, to make sure that they have the resources, the information, the knowledge, the relationships to be able to convey information to their members, to people who belong to their association, to people that they have impact and connection with. And that's why the American Rescue Plan legislation is important, because it would provide us significant resources to be able to expand significantly the work in that space. This is an incredibly important piece of legislation that is absolutely necessary, and the Senate needs to get it done and hopefully get it done as quickly as possible and get whatever differences they're going to have with the House worked out so that we get this thing in place, because there are a lot of people, not just farmers, ranchers, producers, people in the supply chain, but there are a lot of people that are dependent on making sure we get this bill passed. And so I think it's people, I think it's resources, I think it's accountability, essentially making sure that we break it down, that we have a timeline, we have accountability for getting results, for identifying where problems are, for creative solutions to solve those problems, and for implementation of those solutions with reporting to me and to the deputy to make sure that we're actually doing what we say we're going to do. And I think if you combine all of that, I think what you'll have, hopefully at the end of 4 years, is a much stronger, much more vibrant USDA, a much more effective USDA, and I think you'll see a fairer opportunity at USDA, and hopefully that means that farm income across the board for small, mid-sized, socially disadvantaged producers improves.
Howdy.
Mr. Secretary, let's switch to USDA and the offices a little bit here. We all appreciate the USDA employees provide important service to farmers, ranchers, landowners, and all others in our country. It really is the people's department. But I served as Wisconsin Farm Service Agency director here a few years back and became very familiar with the critical role that the staff plays in making USDA very successful. What are you planning to do to help these key employees? And can you help to address the concerns many of our members and our farmers have raised about how to keep FSA and NRCS offices staff safe while still balancing the need for farmers to visit the offices?
Good question. I think first and foremost, when I left the office of the secretary, the Department of Agriculture was rated as one of the top places in the federal government, large departments, to work. We had significantly focused for 8 years on improving morale, listening to employees, trying to create programs that would be supportive of them. And I think we had some success. In fact, Forbes magazine in 2015 ranked the Department of Agriculture as the 263rd best place in America to work. That's all businesses. That's foundations, companies like Google, Apple, and we were 263rd. Today, not so much. We're now at the bottom of best places to work. And some of our mission areas are at the bottom of best places to work. So we have got to rebuild the morale. I think first and foremost, to do that, you have to listen. You have to create opportunities, and I'll have a series of venues, if you will, where myself and the deputy will give people an opportunity to tell us what is on their mind, tell us ways in which we can be helpful at the top to make life better for them. Secondly, by listening, you also are conveying a level of respect for the people that work for USDA. And a level of respect also involves a level of trust. The previous administration did away with teleworking policies, and I think it's a way of basically saying we just weren't trusting that people who were teleworking were working. Well, welcome to post-pandemic world. We've all worked telework. We've all done the Zoom meetings. And frankly, we've been pretty doggone productive in a very difficult circumstance. So I think there are ways in which we can use technology to make work convenient and available and easier for people. Well, obviously, those offices need to be open, but they need to be open safely. So we need to be first and foremost concerned about the safety of our employees. So that means essentially providing the protective equipment, the masks, the social distancing that are necessary to preserve people's health, and also not reopening the offices fully and completely until we know we're on the other side in an individual county, an individual state, an individual region of the country. And it's also sending a message that it's not just about our workers, it's also about your workers, workers who are working on the farm, workers who are working in the processing facilities that are critically important to the markets that you all need. They need to be protected. And fortunately, they're considered to be essential workers. They're under category 1B for vaccination. We need to make sure that governors who are basically operating and implementing the vaccination programs in their respective states honor that essential worker designation, that they don't gloss over the ability to get vaccinations to these essential workers. these workers can be forgotten pretty quickly. We saw incidences of that during the pandemic. So we want to make sure that we continually work with governors to remind them of the importance of getting those farm workers, getting those folks in processing facilities vaccinated, so that you all have assurances and safety on your own farms, and you have markets that are not disrupted. So it's a combination of all of those things, I think, that we need to do. And to do that, we obviously need to staff up. We need to look at where the vacancies are. We need to look at the budget to make sure. Again, the American Rescue Act contains another $47 million to provide additional resources for the department to hire additional people. All of that is, I think, all of it's incredibly important. But I'm very committed to this. I'm very committed to improving morale and respecting the workers who work for USDA.
Thank you. One topic that we haven't covered directly that I know is on a lot of folks' minds, kind of related to the pandemic, is a lot of our rural infrastructure. Now, some of the items that you've already mentioned about building in more local and regional processing, for example, that might be determined kind of as a rural development effort. But more broadly on some of the things like rural healthcare and how USDA can help there, as well as obviously rural broadband, as some of us connecting today are probably getting frozen screens at different times and so forth. But the needs for that rural infrastructure is now more than made clear more than ever. What can USDA do?
Well, on the health side, again, I keep harping on this American Rescue Plan because it does contain $500 million of additional community facility support for community health facilities and for the infrastructure that will allow folks in rural areas to have greater access to healthcare, to mental health services, all of which is extremely important. And obviously the existing programs of USDA, both in rural development, in the rural utility service, and in the rural business and rural housing service, all of those need to be supportive. The broadband issue, it is about resources. At the end of the day, it's about resources, and it's about creative use of those resources. Working with the RECs, working with local governments, working with providers. I will tell you, I'm skeptical that the private sector, in and of it by itself, is ever going to do what it needs to do to make sure that every remote area of this country has access to high-speed internet. They just will not, cannot make the business case to do it, and when they can't, they won't. That's why it's just going to be incredibly important for the government to be heavily engaged in the subsidization and providing resources for expanding broadband. Let's get serious about this. If we're truly interested in making sure that every American, regardless of where they live, regardless of where their zip code is not at a technological disadvantage, we've got to have government financing, and a very significant amount of it. So when the administration turns its attention, as it will, when we get on the other side of COVID, to building back better, at the forefront of building back better for rural America, I think are two things. One is broadband, because you can't have precision agriculture, you can't have all of the things that could potentially help us advance the climate agenda without broadband. You need that data, you need that information, you need that ability to measure, to quantify, to verify in order to support those markets. That's all about broadband. It's all about data. And secondly, you need support for additional manufacturing facilities. There's no reason why we can't convert agricultural waste into a variety of products and create rural jobs while also creating new farm income and new revenue sources for farmers. And that requires resources. Rural America has been forgotten for far too long when it comes to these kinds of investments. And I intend to be quite vocal about this in the infrastructure discussions. If you're truly serious about broadband, then you have to put significant resources behind it. You're going to have to make sure that government's involved in it. You're going to have to be creative about it. I've already had a conversation with Secretary Buttigieg about whether or not there's any way of using right-of-way transportation right-of-ways that the U.S. Department of Transportation has for fiber. I mean, in theory, it would be great for 5G to go to remote areas, but I don't think we're going to have the landscape dotted with all those little all those dishes that have to be created in order to get that 5G. It's not like you build one cell tower, as in the past. You have to have multiple towers to be able to actually have 5G. Well, it may make sense in remote areas to have a little bit more expensive infrastructure in order to make sure that you get that service. So it's resources, and it's advocating for resources, and it's understanding the significance as it relates to larger issues, jobs, rebuilding the economy, distance learning in the event of another disruption from a pandemic, the ability to have telemedicine, and the capacity to have people have access to healthcare and mental health services where they need it, regardless of where they live. And it's about making sure that you have the base, if you will, to rebuild manufacturing based on a bio-based strategy. So many reasons why this infrastructure is important. And frankly, it's not just that. It's not just broadband, not just manufacturing. It's also transportation. And when we talk about transportation, not only is it about rail and highways, but it's also about our river systems. Our rivers basically are lock and dam systems that need significant investment in order to be able to get product to market as quickly and efficiently as possible.
All right, thank you. We're just about out of time here. Patty, I might give you the opportunity for the final question here.
Sure. I've seen a lot of different questions on supply management, growth management things. I know Farmers Union has been talking about this as an issue for many years now, not just in the dairy sector, but also in row crops. We see it working in cranberries, we see it working in sugar. Do you see anything coming down from USDA as far as some type of growth management or dairy supply management programs going forward?
Well, I think the challenge there is whether or not programs like this can be designed in a way that doesn't necessarily result in significantly higher costs to consumers, because then it becomes politically difficult. If politicians are asked to basically support a system that results in higher food costs, it's not long before opponents will basically use that. So I think the trick is whether or not that can be done. I'm certainly anxious to hear from folks about that. Right now, to be honest with you, the focus is obviously COVID relief, climate, better markets, more markets, open, more transparent markets, but certainly open to a conversation. I know that there are members of Congress that are, especially on the dairy side, concerned about the current system, that want a review of it. And I know that there are conversations taking place now about that. We'll see where that goes.
All righty. And with that, we'll have to stop so we can get on with some of our other business. But Mr. Secretary, you've been very generous with your time. We could probably keep you the rest of the day for sure with questions here. But thanks everyone for submitting your questions here. And once again, Mr. Secretary, thank you. We look forward to working with you on a lot of these shared priorities.
Rob, if I could just make a suggestion, if the staff wants to provide the questions that we didn't have a chance to answer to our team, we'll do what we kind of do with our friends in Congress. We'll try to provide you some direction so you can get that information back to your members.
That's very generous of you. We'll certainly take advantage of it. Thanks. We appreciate it.
I'm sure my staff is now may not be as excited about that as you all are. But
thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. Take care.